حلقة جديدة من برنامج حديث الرياض، نتحدث فيها عن اختلاف الثقافات والحضارات وفي ظل قوة الأدب وتأثيره العميق على قارئيه، عبر ندوة بعنوان الأدب كطوق نجاة، إطلاق العنان لقوة الكلمات. ضيفها الشاعر والكاتب كوامي ألكسندر، ويحاوره الأستاذ محمد إسلام.
Welcome to Saudi.
Thank you. Good to be here. Yeah, good to be here.
Right. والله لما تواصلوا معي وزارة الثقافة وقالوا لي إنه في فرصة إنه استضيف الأخ كوامي ألكسندر، الصراحة يعني ما كنت أعرف عنه كثير، بس لما بدأت أبحث عنه لقيت إنه حكايته ملهمة. كانت فرصة صراحة ما تتعوض، فأنا جدا محظوظ بهذا اللقاء.
With time, as you've probably seen it in your craft, it gets easier. Has it gotten easier with every book?
It's a bit misleading because it did get easier. Maybe by book number 30, I was like, oh, this is a formula. I know how to do this. But I realized that I wasn't getting the same sense of satisfaction.
I see.
And I remember it was 2018, and I just felt like I know how to do this. There's got to be more to this. And I moved to London for 3 years and sort of refound my muse and challenged myself to write more challenging stuff, and found that I was a bit more satisfied. So I think there can be a little bit of a danger in getting used to something and not growing.
Complacent.
Right.
Yeah.
كوامي ألكسندر هو شاعر ومعلم ومنتج حائز على جائزة إيمي، ومؤلف ل41 كتاباً، منها أعمال مشهورة وحصلت على ميداليات عالمية، وتم ترشيحه لجائزة الكتاب الوطني. في مجال التلفزيون يعرف كوامي بإنتاج وكتابة مسلسل ذا كروس أوفر المستند إلى روايته التي تحمل الاسم نفسه والحائزة على ميدالية نيوبيري. يساهم كوامي أيضاً في برنامج مورنينج أديشن، ويدير بودكاست واي فاذرز كراي الذي يناقش قضايا الأبوة والحب والخسارة. ويهتم كوامي بتعزيز القراءة ومحو الأمية عالمياً، ويشارك في فعاليات أدبية مرموقة مثل مهرجان إدنبرا للكتاب. يشغل كوامي منصب المدير الفني للفنون الأدبية في مؤسسة شوتوكوا، ويؤمن بتغيير العالم كلمة تلو الأخرى.
I see a lot of people heading in there who look very excited. I hope you're just as excited to go in. All right, let's do it. Let's go.
I am honored to win the awards, and I'm satisfied. I'm pleased, but I still have more I want to do. The awards are great, but the real reward is when young people read my books, is when people find my books inspirational. That's the real reward. So I don't want to say I'm not satisfied, but I also have more to do.
Heritage, the Heritage Commission. So you go to a place like Al-Ula, you're going to see their fingerprints everywhere. I really highly recommend Jan, Feb, March to give Al-Ula a try.
Oh, really?
You'll love it.
Okay.
You'll feel, whenever I'm there, I honestly feel the energy. Like I feel there's some sort of higher being in that land. I keep looking for the crossover.
I know, right?
You know? Y'all better be selling it.
Yeah. I think sports are a great metaphor for our lives. The things we learn and do and see on the court and the field are things we can apply to our lives. Persistence, teamwork, gratitude, honor, resilience. I have a story. I have a story I want to share. I have a story that matters. It's not easy, but if I'm persistent, if I have imagination, if I develop the skill, I can do it. I wrote this while I was living in London.
Oh,
Yeah.
in the COVID days?
Yeah. Books and sports are two areas of arts and culture that I find to be very inspirational for me. You know, you can travel to other places without ever having to get off your feet by opening a book.
I'm seeing like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. There's so many Tony Robbins in Arabic. Do you consider a translated version Arabic?
You know, the
Especially
issue,
the Muhammad Ali one, I think
you
it's
tell
nice.
me, the issue may be if it rhymes.
If it rhymes,
And so
because
you
it
have
rhymes
to
in
find
English.
an Arabic poet who
Yeah.
knows poetry
Yes,
to keep the same.
to keep the rhythm, the flow.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah, I hear you.
I plan on talking about the power of poetry, how literature can transform our lives, how my writing has saved my life, how it ultimately, I find that poetry and books and writing are about helping us become better human beings by showing us what's possible. Books open a world of possible.
أنا متحمس جدا لحضور النداوي اللي مثل كذا والتي تتكلم مثلا عن القيم وتطوير الذات واللي هي كيف أن تقوم بمهمة معينة من خلال التخطيط والتنظيم وما إلى ذلك.
متحمسة مرة أنه يدخل الندوة ويقول قصته أنه كيف بدأ مع الشعر.
أنا أكثر شيء يعني أحب أستكشف عن الناس هو التحديات. يعني أوكي إذا توفقت هي حكاية حلوة ممتاز، بس أنا أبغى أعرف أنت إيش سويت عشان تتعدى التحديات اللي واجهتها في الحياة.
I sent the book to 18 different book publishers around the world, and I got 18 rejections. My first encounter with poetry was through a book that my mother had given me. I was 3 years old. Fox, socks, knocks, box. Fox in socks, socks in box. When my mother came to school, the teacher said, "Mrs. Alexander, your son Kwame is a bit arrogant." Good evening. I bring you greetings from my family. I bring you greetings from America. It is so good to be in a place where poetry plays such a central role to art, to culture, to community. It is such an honor to be in a place that has a tradition of words that are beautiful and profound and meaningful. I grew up in a place called New York City. My first encounter with poetry was through a book that my mother had given me. I was 3 years old, and I read a book by the famous poet Dr. Seuss. You may have heard of this poem. It's called Fox in Socks. Fox, socks, knocks, box. Fox in socks, socks in box. I love that poem. I memorized it. As a 3-year-old, I knew that poem back and forth. One day, while I was at school, I built a house, a castle, out of wooden blocks to show my mother when she came to pick me up. This was going to be a castle dedicated to my mother. But before she arrived to get me, one of my classmates had kicked over my castle of blocks. And I was so upset. I walked up to him with the only weapons I had, my words, and I said, "Those were my blocks that you flipped. Lest you want a quick payback, better fix my quick block stack." At which point the little boy started crying. When my mother came to school, the teacher said, "Mrs. Alexander, your son Kwame is a bit arrogant. He intimidates all the children with his words." And my mother said, "Thank you. We teach him to use his words." From a very early age, I knew the power of literature and the power of voice. You see, our brains are wired for story. We take these bits and pieces from our world and we weave them together in our minds in an effort to create a narrative, in an effort to make them make sense, in an effort to make us feel something. We could hear a song and suddenly we are transported to a memory of when that song was first played, or we can walk by someone and smell a scent, and suddenly we feel a certain kind of goodness because of that remembrance. It's all about story, and for those of us who are storytellers, we are involved in this journey of chasing memory and seeking identity. Today, I visited Jack's, and upon my arrival on a building, I saw the following words: "The writings of today are a promise for tomorrow." You see, the power of literature is that it can transform us. It enjoys a special kind of permanence and authority. It creates canons for generations and generations to study and to enjoy. And it interprets, adapts, and it makes the world their own. But more importantly, I believe that literature, that books can save us, that they can transform us into kind, confident, and connected human beings. Books are mirrors and books are windows. They allow us to see ourselves and they allow us to see each other. I believe there are three things you need to become a writer, to become successful at writing. One, imagination. Where does it come from? It comes from reading. It comes from paying attention to the world around you. It comes from being inspired. Today, I visited with Ahmed Mater, and I got to witness his groundbreaking art. And I was not moved in a way that I can articulate to you today. But I was moved by the emotion of it all. And I found a poem that I'd like to share by the famous Caribbean poet Derek Walcott. It's called Love After Love. The time will come when with elation you will greet yourself arriving at your own door and in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, "Sit here, eat." You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life. The second thing you need is skill. Where does that come from? It comes from instruction. Where are those opportunities for you to learn from other writers? It comes through reading. Famous poet T.S. Eliot said, "Immature writers imitate, and mature writers borrow." I believe that nothing is new. We borrow from the legacy, from the tradition of those who have come before us. The last thing I think you need is you need to have the will. So you need the imagination, you need the skill, and you need the will. Because this journey to creating art that matters is filled with rejection, is filled with no. I know this journey firsthand. You see, about 10 years ago, I had an idea for a book. It was my 15th book. It was a novel, and the novel was told in poems. I met a publisher at a festival much like this in New York City. And she came to me and she said, "Kwame, I would love to consider publishing your book if you're writing a novel in poems. If you send it to me, I'll consider it." And so that summer I went home and I finished writing this book. And it was 50 pages long. And it was the best book I could ever write. And I sent it to this publisher. And she sent me a note back that said the following: "Dear Kwame, thank you so much for writing this book. Unfortunately, it's not that good, and we aren't gonna publish it." And so I went back and I rewrote the book. And now the book was 100 pages long. And it was a novel, and it was told in poems, and it had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I sent it back to this publisher. And this time, she sent me a note that said the following: "Dear Kwame, thank you so much for rewriting your book. Unfortunately, it's still not that good, and we are not gonna publish it." And so I went back and I rewrote the book again. And now the book was 200 pages long. And I felt like this was the best book I could ever write. It was about two brothers who were twins who loved playing basketball. And I sent the book back to this publisher. And this time she sent me a note that said, "Dear Kwame, please stop sending me your book. And so I rewrote the book one more time. And now the book was 238 pages. And it was a novel about two twin brothers. And you could tell them apart because one brother had long hair and the other brother had no hair. And one day the brother with no hair, he bets his brother that if he makes the last shot in the basketball game, he gets to cut off all his brother's hair. And his brother responds like this: if my hair were a tree, I'd climb it. I'd kneel down beneath and enshrine it. I'd treat it like gold and then mine it. Each day before school, I unwind it. And right before games, I entwine it. These locks on my head, I designed it. And one last thing, if you don't mind it, that bet you just made, I decline it. I sent the book to 18 different book publishers around the world, and I got 18 rejections. No one wanted to publish the book because they said it was a novel told in poems, and they said that boys wouldn't read poetry. And no one wanted to publish the book because it was a novel about basketball, and they said that girls wouldn't read a book about sports. And so I gave up. I went to bed that night, and I said, this is never gonna work. And I woke up the next morning and I said, Kwame, wait a minute. You are a say yes person. You can't allow other people's no's to define who you are. You've gotta say yes to yourself. And so in that moment, I decided to publish the book myself. And a week later, I got a letter. And the letter was from a publishing company in Boston, Massachusetts. And the woman's name was Margaret Ramo, and she said, Dear Kwame, I read your novel. I loved your novel. Everybody in our team loved it, and we'd be honored to publish your book. And so the book published in March of 2014. And about a year later, 6 years after I'd begun writing this book, after 22 rejections, on February the 2nd, 2015, I was sitting in my house. It was about midnight. Everyone was asleep except me. At about 2 a.m., I got hungry, so I made some food. At about 4 a.m., I started listening to some jazz. I could not go to sleep. Finally, at 6 a.m., I went upstairs and I got in the bed and I fell asleep. At 7:16 a.m., my phone rang. I looked at my phone and it said no caller ID. I said, who's calling me this early? So I answered the phone. Now, before I continue, let me ask you all a question. Have you all ever heard of the Grammy Awards or the Emmy Awards? Okay. There's an award that's like the Grammys, but it's for the best children's book in America. It's called the Newbery Medal. So the guy on the call says, I'm calling from the Newbery Committee. And I say to myself, this is probably gonna be a good call. And he says, Kwame, I'm calling from the Newbery Medal Committee to tell you that, and all I could think is, would I be getting this call if I had given up after the first no, or the fourth, or the 11th, or the 18th? And he says, I'm calling to tell you that your novel, The Crossover, is the winner of the Newbery Medal for the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children. None of this happens if you don't have the will. There is a basketball metaphor that I love to use. It goes like this: dribble, fake, shoot, miss. Dribble, fake, shoot, miss. Dribble, fake, shoot, miss. Dribble, fake, shoot, swish. You gotta keep taking the shot or you're never going to make it. Before we end this, I'm gonna do a little call and response. See if y'all can help me out. When I say cross, you say over. Cross, cross. When I say, you say yes. Say. When I say thank, you say you. Thank you all so much.
Did you have a specific goal in mind when putting the crossover together?
I mean, first of all, I wanted to write a really good story. If we do not write our own stories, if we do not share the things that matter to us, we allow other people to define us for who we are. I will say this, writing a book is way harder than writing for TV. Writing for TV is...
Congratulations, first of all, on an illustrious career, 40 books and counting. Seeing one when we passed through Jarir was pretty nice. I wanted to ask you if we can kick off with, you often speak about how words have changed your life so much. Was your relationship with words back from the early days, was it like a love at first sight, or were there some teething issues from the get-go?
Books and literature and words were always either fun and exciting in my house where I grew up, or they were reward and punishment. So my mother made words and books fun. She recited poems to us. She sang songs to us. My father, who was extremely bookish, had us reading the dictionary and the encyclopedia, which, for a 7 or 8-year-old kid, you don't want to necessarily have to do that. So books and words and literature were very much a part of my everyday life growing up.
The book, The Crossover, was among your first works, perhaps maybe your most famous one. What were you trying to achieve with it? Did you have a specific goal in mind when putting the crossover together?
I mean, first of all, I wanted to write a really good story. I wanted to write a book that I would have wanted to have read when I was 12 years old. Like, that was important to me. And I think sort of the bigger picture was I want to create a story that shines a light on Black Americans. I find that it's important for us to acknowledge and realize that the stories that we tell about ourselves, the stories that we write and share about our communities, should be the stories that define us. If we do not write our own stories, if we do not share the things that matter to us, we allow other people to define us for who we are. And that's not a good thing. And so, thank you. And so the crossover was my attempt to create this story about the people I grew up with, about my best friends, about, the things that my family cared about. And I like to call it matter of fact Black. And so if I were to translate that, here today, I would say that, Saudi writers have a responsibility to create a literature that's going to tell the rest of the world who you are, what you represent. Matter of fact Saudi, that kind of thing.
So on some level, it was about owning and telling the narrative.
Absolutely. I mean, when I was 4 years old, I told you all we lived in New York City. And my father was getting his graduate degree from Columbia University. My father was also a basketball star in college. So when I was 4, he would take me to the basketball court and put me at the free throw line and tell me to shoot the basket. Now I'm this short. I'm like this tall. The ball is bigger than me. And he wants me to shoot the ball in the basket. And so I would shoot it, and I never made it. Well, the man who worked at the playground at the basketball court, he came over and he had a big wrench. And he said, "Let me lower the goal for your son." And my father said, "Nobody's gonna lower my son's goals. He doesn't know he can't make it." Like, I think we have a responsibility to teach and inspire our young people and be inspired ourselves to know that our dreams, our goals, our plans in life are attainable. And I think the best way to teach that is through story.
Absolutely. I love the idea that your dad never wanted to lower or play with, goals are goals. I love what you said about you don't know you can't make it until you try.
Right.
So the crossover
eventually turned to or found a place on Disney TV. What was it like seeing your work go from book to the screen?
Again, it took me 6 years to get that book published. And it was a lot of no's, a lot of rejection. The only goal I had was to write a good book, to tell an important story, and to get it published. Winning the award was not even on my radar. So when we won the award, Disney and Netflix and all of these streamers started calling to ask to make a TV show based on the book. And I told everyone, I need to be the head writer on the show. And I've never written for television. But again, remember how I was raised. Never let anyone lower your goals. One of my favorite quotes that I grew up with was, I am the greatest, not because I am better than anyone else, but because no one is better than me. And so I told Disney, I need to be the head writer. And they were like, you can't be the head writer. And I said, well, you can't have my show. And they said, well, what about if we pair you with another writer who's done it before? And I said, okay. And so I worked with a writer named Damani Johnson, and we wrote the show, and it aired in April of 2023, 8 episodes. I will say this, writing a book is way harder than writing for TV. Writing for TV is, I'm not gonna say it's easy work, but writing novels, writing literature, it's definitely much more difficult.
The themes of rhythm and music and movement are prevalent in your work. What connection do you see between poetry and music, and how do you bring all that energy into storytelling?
I think the goal is not for us to tell you something. The goal is for us to show you. And I think poetry has this way of making you feel something. I often say, if you want to change the way people act, change the way they think. If you want to change the way they think, change the way they feel. And what better way to do that than through the distillation of the human heart on the page, in a few lines, in a haiku, in a ghazal. It just hits you in an immediate way that makes you feel something that you weren't feeling before, if it's a good poem. So, I mean, that's a long answer to your question, but I think, yeah, I would think that poetry and music, there is a musicality to poetry, and there is a sort of poeticness to music. Maybe they're cousins.
They are related somehow.
They're definitely related. They're real close.
Yeah. If anyone has any questions for Kwame, if you can just fill out the paper that's on your chair, and one of the ushers will come and collect it from you. So any questions for Kwame, please fill it out. You've constantly pushed boundaries of traditional genres, incorporating elements of modern youth culture. What drives this creative exploration, per se?
The mind of an adult begins in the imagination of a child. I write a lot of books for children because I want to help our young people imagine a better world. It's important as artists, as writers, as people, as human beings, that we acknowledge where we've come from and we build on that and sort of, add to it. And I'm getting so excited about this, I completely forgot the question.
What drives your creative exploration?
Wow, in all these years, I've never been asked that question. What drives your creative exploration? I think what brought me here, I believe I have something to say. I believe I have something to say that matters. The thing is, I have got to make sure that I am a willing participant in life. I am walking around, I am paying attention, I am engaging, I am connecting, I am being interesting, so that ultimately I will have something interesting to share. My job as a writer is to make my personal your business. And not just for the sake of telling you who I am or what I'm about. Like, ultimately, I want to write things that are life-giving and life-saving. I believe that this work that we do as writers is sacred work. I believe that we hold in our hands the capacity to inspire, to inform, to engage, and to empower people through our words. It's been done for centuries. How many of you are writers? Raise your hand. Okay, a few. How many of you are readers? Yeah. So here's the thing. Reading is just a short, reading is a longer form of writing. Like, you're reading because you are interested in the story that's being told. And ultimately, when we're reading, we're figuring out how our story fits in with that story. We are writing our own story. Y'all didn't know that, did you?
I don't know if you know, but Saudi Arabia, us Saudis are very active on social media. One of the highest rates in the world per capita. What advice would you give young Saudis who are looking to find their voice, but maybe a little bit intimidated by the writing process?
I'm gonna sound like a broken record. I don't know if it's the answer, but it is an answer. And poetry works, you all. Poetry is so concise. There's so much white space on the page. It doesn't intimidate readers. You're able to talk about really heavy things in a few words. I find that young people can get through a poem and it can build their confidence. It can trigger their voice. Poetry works. Here's how I know. When I graduated from college, I met a woman and she was beautiful and I wanted to marry her. But I wasn't very cool back then. I was very shy, but I did know how to write poetry. I wrote her a poem a day for a year. She was way above my station and she married me. The poetry works. I think poetry is a surefire gateway, you all, to getting young people excited about reading. Absolutely.
You run workshops for young writers. What strategies have you found out that works well? Do you think they can apply cross-culturally?
Ebony trap, dark, black and lovely, brown, mocha, jumping, double black, brown, night black, out of sight black, so black, purple black, blue black, 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 black, brown. I don't care where you from. You hear the rhythm. You feel it. Love. The woman I told you that married me, the last poem I wrote for her went like this. I know my honey cares for me. See, I asked her for $1 and she gave me $3. Now, I've dated some girls in my life, but this here woman is gonna be my wife. I know my sugar's love is true. See, I told my mama and she told hers too. Now, I've dated a lot of girls in my life, but this here woman's gonna be my wife. My baby's been asking how I feel, wants to know if my feelings real. So I proceed to kiss her on her lips, politely place my hand on her hips, whisper these words in her ear and hope she doesn't get too excited to hear that I've dated a lot of girls in my life, but you, one day, gonna be my... we all can, feel the love. So I think that the words, much like the music, they bring us together in community. You know?
They do. They do. Changes that you'd like to see in the world of poetry and writing 50 years from now? Is there a pain point? Is there a positive change that you'd like to see?
I have 2 daughters. And when my youngest daughter was 5 years old, or when she was 7 years old, her friends would come over. She would have play dates. And they would want to run around and just play games and do all kinds of things. But before they got into their activities, I would say, we're gonna write a poem. And they would say, we don't wanna write a poem. We just wanna go play. We wanna have fun. And I said, trust me, we're gonna have fun. And so hidden around my house, I would have strips of paper. And on the strips of paper would be an object, a ball, or a feeling, love. And I'd have strips all around the house. And their goal would be to find an object and to find an emotion, and then they would have to write a haiku together. A haiku, as some of you know, is a Japanese form of poetry that has 3 lines. It's usually about nature. The first line has 5 syllables, the second has 7, and the third has 5. And so they would have to find and create a haiku. After about 30 minutes, they had done it and they had written their haiku. And I was like, okay, I'm good. I'm gonna go take a nap. No, we wanna find more haiku. We wanna write some more haiku. What I would like to see happen is I'd like to see poetry become a part of our familial lives. I'd like to see us writing poems, sharing poems, reading poems at home, especially in a culture like this where poetry just plays such a central role in your history. I think that will ultimately help us all become better people. I would love to see that.
That'll be nice to see one day, inshallah. Any questions from members of the audience? Thank you. Okay, what made you fall in love with poetry?
I went to college to become a doctor, so I studied biochemistry. And in my second year, I took this class called organic chemistry. And I was like, oh, this may not work out for me. And we had a pretty famous poet come and teach at my college. Her name was Nikki Giovanni. And I took her course. And this was at the same time where I had begun to write love poems. And I had begun to write poems of protest. At my college, Virginia Tech, there was no Black Studies program. So Black Studies would be a study of the history of Black Americans. And we didn't have that area of study. And I felt that that was wrong, that we should have it because I wanted to, and my classmates wanted to take those courses. And so we held protests. And in those protests, I would recite poems. And the response, we ultimately got a Black Studies program. And so the response to the poetry, to the protest, that coupled with me writing the love poems, I think I just began to see the power of poetry and how your voice can matter. And it also made me feel more confident and more cool. So I think that's the moment when I sort of fell in love with it.
Do you remember your first poem, the first bit of writing that you did?
My first poem was a poem for my mother, of course. And it was when I was 12 years old. It was a poem for Mother's Day. Well, you want to hear it?
Absolutely.
It's a terrible poem. It went like this. Dear Mommy, I hate Mother's Day because in my heart, every day is Mother's Day. And I love you, dear Mommy.
That's an amazing poem. Not as bad as...
She loved it. But yeah, that was the first poem.
Thank you very much, Kwame Alexander. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for Kwame Alexander.
Thank you, thank you.
اللي ألهمني في الأخ كوامي إنه الرجل هذا ما أخذ السكة المعروفة اللي هي الرياضة أو التمثيل، مشي عكس التيار ودخل في مجال الشاعر أو الكتابة. فهذا الشيء صراحة يلهمني، وأتمنى إنه يلهم الأشخاص اللي عندنا في السعودية أو في المنطقة إنه مو شرط تسوي اللي الناس سووا كثير منه سواء الرياضة أو غيره، بس في مجالات تانية اللي تستحق الواحد يشوفها.
Say yes to yourself. Say yes to what's possible. Find your voice. Lift your voice for the things that matter.
الإبل حيوانات عظيمة الخلق، في معيشتها أسرار، وفي خلقها إعجاز، ولها سلوكيات نادرة، وطبائع غريبة قد لا توجد في أي مخلوق حي آخر، وهي أنفس أموال العرب، يضربون بها المثل في نفاسة الشيء، لأنه ليس عندهم أعظم منها، ولذلك جعلت دية في الدماء ومقياسا للعزة والغناء.
عندما نلتفت إلى الأمثال العربية، نجد أن الأمثال العربية أيضا ترتكز دائما على صورة الإبل. التجليات التي ظهرت في الشعر العربي عن الإبل، ظهرت 4 محاور أساسية في الشعر العربي.
أما صفاتها الخلقية فكثيرة، من أول هذه الصفات الخلاء. يقال ناقة خلو، وهي الناقة التي بركت فضربت فلم تقم. وقد وصف الخليل الخلاء بأنه كالحران في الدابة، فقال: والخلاء في الإبل كالحران في الدابة.
في بيتين كتبتهما قبل قليل أقول فيها: يا مساء معطرا بالجمال وليال بنورها كالليالي، نحن في معرض الكتاب نباري كل نجم بسحرها والدلال.